I'm Elizabeth Thompson, but everyone always called me Betty. I've lived in the same house in Phoenix, Arizona, for over 50 years. The house is a modest two-story building with a charming porch, where I used to sit and watch my children, Michael and Susan, play in the yard. It all started innocently, keeping memories of my children. First, there were just some old toys, drawings made at school, and the uniforms of the football and ballet teams. These things brought warmth to my heart, memories of simpler, happier times. As the years passed, my collection of memories began to grow. Every birthday, every school event, every holiday seemed to add another item to my collection. I kept clothes, toys, schoolwork, and even receipts from purchases we made together. Each piece was a fragment of a story I didn't want to forget. At some point, I started saving not only my children's memories, but also objects I found around the city, such as old magazines, worn-out furniture, and appliances that I promised to repair one day. I knew the clutter was a problem, but each item had a memory, a story. Things piled up, and soon the house began to overflow. The rooms, which were previously living spaces, were now filled to the ceiling with boxes, bags, and piles of miscellaneous objects. The living room sofa became invisible under a mountain of magazines, and the dining table was a battlefield of papers and old photographs. Getting around the house became a complicated task, with narrow paths between the piles of things. My children, now adults and with their own lives, began to avoid me. "Mommy, you need help," Michael said, when he managed to overcome his resistance and enter the house. He worked as a lawyer in a neighboring town and barely had time for frequent visits. "This isn't healthy," Susan complained during one of her rare visits. She was a nurse and understood the risks to my health better than anyone, but she was also busy with her own family. They both tried to convince me to get rid of some things, but I couldn't get rid of anything. I knew deep down they were right. The house was no longer a welcoming home, but a chaotic storehouse of memories and objects. However, the idea of getting rid of anything was too painful. Each item represented a precious moment, a connection to the past that I didn't want to lose. The mess was my refuge, a place where I could relive every moment of my children's lives and my own story. It was as if, by keeping all those things, I could hold on to time and not let it take the memories away. The situation got worse when I started to feel the weight of isolation. Without Michael and Susan's regular visits, the house became even quieter and lonely. I comforted myself with my objects, but deep down I felt a growing sadness. Loneliness seeped through the crowded walls, and the absence of my children was a constant reminder of how my obsession had torn us apart. But even so, the idea of changing was paralyzing. I was stuck in a cycle of accumulation and loss, unable to find a way out. Michael and Susan stopped visiting me. At first, the excuses varied between work and family commitments, but it soon became clear that the real reason was my condition as a hoarder. Michael, always busy with legal cases and tight deadlines, would call me sporadically, mentioning how busy he was and promising to come next week, a promise he rarely kept. Susan, overwhelmed with hospital shifts and caring for her young children, also began to find reasons to avoid my house. With each apology, my heart broke a little more. I felt alone, but my things kept me company. Each item had an emotional value, even if to others it just seemed like trash. The ragdoll Susan loved as a child, Michael's first football trophy, even the Christmas cards we received each year. Everything had a special place in my collection. These objects, for me, were pieces of a life full of love and memories. The absence of my children only intensified my attachment to these things, as if by keeping them I could keep a piece of them with me. I tried to explain it to them, but they didn't understand. "You need professional help," Michael insisted during our phone conversations. He mentioned television shows about hoarders and suggested specialized therapists. "We can't live like this," declared Susan, always more direct in her criticisms. She sent me pamphlets about cleaning services and professional organizers, but I felt attacked, as if they were suggesting I get rid of my memories. Their every suggestion was like a knife in my heart. The distance between us only grew. Calls became rarer and visits almost non-existent. I felt the house becoming more and more full and empty at the same time. Full of objects, but empty of life and love. Loneliness became a constant, and I clung even tighter to my possessions, trying to fill the void left by the absence of my children. The days passed slowly, each one lonelier than the last. My home, once full of laughter and joy, was now transformed into a mausoleum of memories. The drawn curtains, dusty windows, and narrow hallways filled with piles of objects created an oppressive atmosphere. I knew the situation was out of control, but the thought of giving up anything was unbearable. My children didn't understand the value each item had to me, and I couldn't find the words to make them understand. The house, increasingly crowded, became a symbol of our deteriorating relationship. Each accumulated object represented a barrier between me and my children, a reminder of how far apart our lives had drifted. I was surrounded by memories, but these memories, instead of comforting me, only emphasized the loneliness and the growing distance between us. The situation seemed hopeless, and I felt lost in a sea of memories, unable to find a way out. One day, when trying to find an old photo to relive a specific memory, I went up to the attic, a space I rarely visited due to the chaos. Each step was careful, avoiding the piles of boxes and bags filled with various objects. The air was dusty, and a thin layer of dust covered everything, reminding me of how long it had been since I was last there. While moving a stack of boxes, I felt one of them slip and, before I could catch it, it fell to the floor, scattering its contents throughout the attic. Among the fallen items, my eyes caught something peculiar. A small wooden chest that I hadn't seen in decades. The trunk was covered in dust and cobwebs, but still, it had an air of mystery and nostalgia. I remembered him vaguely, as if I were in a distant dream. With shaking hands and a racing heart, I carefully opened the chest. Inside, to my surprise, was a collection of old coins, all dating back to the 19th century. The shiny silver of the coins reflected the dim light from the attic, creating an almost magical glow. As I held one of the coins between my fingers, I remembered the stories my grandfather used to tell about his collection. He spoke so enthusiastically about these coins, as if each one carried a piece of our family history. I never imagined they were still here, hidden among my things. Emotion took over me, a mix of joy and nostalgia, when I realized that I had found something so valuable in the midst of chaos. I decided I needed to know more about these coins. I was amazed at the discovery and knew I had to evaluate them. I called an antiques expert, a kind, respectable-looking man, who came to my house a few days later. He examined each coin with meticulous attention, using a magnifying glass and special tools. His expression of surprise and admiration confirmed my suspicions. These coins were indeed valuable. The expert explained that the coins were rare and dated from significant periods in American history. He mentioned the Civil War, the California Gold Rush, and other historical events that these coins silently witnessed. With his every word, my heart filled with a mixture of pride and hope. It was a treasure in my mess, something that could change everything. I thought about what these coins could mean to my children and me. The discovery of the coins brought new light into my life. For a moment, I forgot about the isolation and sadness I felt. I had something tangible and valuable, something that could, in some way, redeem the years of accumulation and loneliness. I began to imagine the possibilities, but I also knew I needed to be cautious. This treasure could be the key to restoring my relationship with Michael and Susan, or it could lead to more problems. But at that moment, all I felt was renewed hope. News of the coins spread quickly, like wildfire through dry straw. Before long, Michael and Susan learned of the discovery. For the first time in years, they appeared together on my doorstep, their faces marked by curiosity and interest. Michael, trying to appear casual, forced a smile. "Mom, we heard about the coins," he said, trying to hide the anxiety in his voice. Susan, always more direct and practical, got to the point. "Have you decided what you're going to do with them?" he asked, looking me straight in the eye. I could feel the tension in the air. I knew they weren't there for me, but for the value of the coins. The realization of this saddened me deeply, but at the same time, I realized I had an opportunity. Maybe, just maybe, this treasure could serve as a bridge to reconnect our fractured lives. I felt a mixture of hope and distrust, but decided to take the chance. I invited them in, which they did with a hesitation that did not escape my eyes. The house, still full of accumulated memories and objects, seemed to suffocate them. Michael and Susan looked around with uncomfortable expressions, as if they were entering foreign territory. "Why don't you help me organize things a little? Maybe then we can find more surprises like this," I suggested, trying to sound excited and hopeful. They agreed, albeit reluctantly. We started working together, something we hadn't done in a long time. Michael, with his organizational skills, took the lead in categorizing the items. Susan, with her pragmatism, began to separate what was trash from what could be useful. As we cleaned, we found old photographs, love letters, old toys, fragments of the past that evoked laughter and a few tears. At first, the conversation revolved around coins. "Do you know how much this could be worth?" Michael asked, his eyes shining with expectation. Susan, less excited but equally interested, suggested plans on how to invest the money. I, on the other hand, tried to redirect the conversation to memories and moments from our life together. With each discovery of a sentimental item, we shared stories and laughter, and I could feel a slight shift in the atmosphere. Even though I knew his motives were selfish, I took the opportunity to try to rekindle the family bond. The house slowly started to feel less like a warehouse and more like a home again. Deep down, I hoped this experience of cleaning and organizing together would remind them of what really matters. I wanted to believe that behind the initial greed there was a chance for redemption, a glimmer of familial love that could be salvaged. Michael and Susan started coming regularly. At first, their eyes sparkled with interest in the coins, but as they spent more time in the house, they realized the true magnitude of the mess. Stacks of boxes and bags filled every corner, making it difficult to even walk through the rooms. "Mom, this is more serious than we thought," Michael said, with an expression of genuine concern. Susan, nodding in agreement, added, "We need professional help to clean this up." Accepting their help was not easy. I felt embarrassed by the condition of the house, but I also knew it was a necessary step. We hired a team of professional organizers, and together, we began tackling the monumental task of cleaning and organizing the house. The team was efficient, but the process was emotionally exhausting for me. Each item removed seemed to rip a piece out of my heart. As we worked together, old memories began to surface. In one of the boxes, we found an old photo album, full of images of Michael and Susan when they were children. Memories of beach holidays, birthdays, and moments of pure joy. Susan held a photo of herself in a ballet dress, with tears in her eyes. "Remember that day, Mom? I was so nervous before my performance," she said, laughing softly. Michael, in turn, found a box with his old toys. "My God, my old train. I thought I had lost it forever," he exclaimed, smiling from ear to ear. The house was transforming before our eyes, and with each item we organized, more stories were relived. The love letters I exchanged with their father, the drawings they made at school, even old family recipes. Everything brought us a little closer. Each discovery brought us a little closer. It felt like somehow the mess that separated us was now bringing us together. Conversations stopped being just about coins and started to include our lives, our feelings, and our hopes. We started planning family get-togethers and dinners, something we hadn't done in years. As the weeks went by, the house gained a new life, and with it, our relationship too. Physical cleansing seemed to reflect emotional cleansing, removing the barriers that kept us apart. I saw in Michael and Susan genuine concern and desire to reconnect. I felt that, finally, we were on the right path to rebuilding what was lost, and that gave me new hope for the future. Over time, I started to notice something strange. Despite appearances of rapprochement, Michael and Susan seemed increasingly more focused on the coins than on me. Every conversation invariably ended on the subject of coins and their value. The first few times, I thought it was just initial excitement, but as the days went by, this obsession became more and more evident. I tried to divert the topic, talking about other memories or planning moments together, but they always found a way to return to the topic of coins. One day, while I was organizing some boxes upstairs, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Curious and a little worried, I approached silently and heard Michael and Susan talking in low tones. "We need to make sure we keep the money," Michael said, his voice thick with determination. Yes, but we need her to trust us, Susan replied, trying to maintain a calm tone. That sentence resonated in my mind, and my heart broke. The trust he was beginning to rebuild collapsed in an instant. That conversation revealed a painful truth. I realized that their interest was not genuine. They had their eye on the money, not me. Tears filled my eyes as I tried to process this betrayal. All the hope I had about renewing our family bond vanished like smoke. I felt deceived, used, and deeply sad. For days, I mulled over those words, trying to find an explanation or justify their behavior. But the reality was clear and cruel. I decided I needed to do something before it was too late. I couldn't allow my children, driven by greed, to take over something that should have a greater purpose. If this was what really mattered to them, I needed to make a drastic decision to protect not only the material value of the coins, but also my grandfather's memory and the legacy he had left behind. It was painful to accept that my own children could be so insensitive, but I knew I had to be firm. I went to my lawyer and reviewed my will. I determined that all the money from the coins would be donated to a local nursing home, where many elderly people, like me, were left behind by their families. I explained to the lawyer the importance of this decision and how I wanted my legacy to help those who really needed care and companionship. The decision brought me a strange peace, a relief in knowing I was doing the right thing, even if it meant taking my children further away. When I told Michael and Susan about my decision, the reaction was immediate and fierce. "What are you doing, Mom? This money is rightfully ours," Michael shouted, with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Susan, her eyes fixed on me, exclaimed, "You can't do this to us." But I was determined. They couldn't understand the meaning of that decision, but I knew it was the right thing to do. And as much as it hurt, I was ready to move on from this, even if it meant losing my children for good. After hearing that devastating conversation between Michael and Susan, I knew I needed to act quickly. The trust and hope that I had begun to rebuild with my children was ruined. So, I looked for a lawyer and explained my situation. Sitting in an austere room at a law firm, I told the lawyer about my decision to make a new will. I decided that all the money from the coins would be donated to a local nursing home, a place where many elderly people, just like me, were left behind by their families. That seemed like the best way to ensure that my legacy helped those who really needed it. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, listened intently as I explained my motivation. He agreed that my decision was noble and fair. We prepared all the necessary documents, and I signed the new will with firm hands, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. As I left the office, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was protecting not only the value of the coins, but also honoring my grandfather's memory and doing something meaningful for the community. When I told Michael and Susan about my decision, the reaction was immediate and fierce. I invited them to a meeting at home, trying to remain calm. "I have something important to discuss with you," I began, trying to hide the pain in my voice. Michael, always impetuous, asked, "What is it, Mom? What's so urgent?" I took a deep breath and explained about the new will and the donation of the coins to the asylum. "What are you doing, Mom? This money is rightfully ours," Michael shouted, his voice full of indignation and disbelief. He stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair in the process as his face turned red with anger. Susan, her eyes fixed on me, said nothing for a long moment. Her silence was even more painful than Michael's screams. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and full of resentment. "You can't do this to us. We are your family." I knew the decision was right, even if it meant losing them for good. Facing Michael's fury and Susan's piercing gaze, I stood my ground. "Understand, this is my will. You have not understood the true value of these coins. They are not just money, they are part of our history, and I want you to do something good for those who really need it." Tears ran down my face, but my voice didn't waver. The discussion lasted for hours, with accusations and pleas, but I remained unshakable. In the end, Michael stormed out, slamming the door. Susan remained for a few minutes longer, looking at me with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "Goodbye, Mother," she said finally, before turning on her heel and leaving. I knew this decision could be the final point in our relationship, but I was at peace with my choice. After they were gone, the house seemed strangely silent. I sat in the living room, surrounded by a lifetime of memories. Although the pain of separation was acute, I felt an inner serenity. I knew I had done the right thing. My legacy was now destined to bring some joy and comfort to other seniors, and that gave me a solace I never thought I would find. The tension increased considerably after the revelation of my new will. Michael and Susan began to pressure me incessantly, trying in every possible way to convince me to change my mind. "You're being irrational, Mom. This money could help us so much," Susan insisted, her voice filled with frustration and despair. "You're betraying us," Michael accused, with eyes full of anger and hurt. But I was determined, firm in my conviction that I was doing what was right. Their every visit turned into a verbal battle. Susan talked about the plans they had for the money, mentioning the financial difficulties they faced and how that amount could change their lives. Michael, in turn, used harsh words and accusations, saying that I was destroying our family with my stubbornness. The emotional toll was enormous, but I knew I couldn't give in. Those coins were not just a material inheritance. They were a symbol of what my family stood for, and I wanted them to have a greater purpose. Then, one dreary morning, I woke up and realized something was terribly wrong. My house, normally a chaotic fortress of memories and objects, was ransacked. Open boxes, furniture moved, objects thrown on the floor. A chill came over me when I realized what had happened. I ran to the coins' hiding place and, as I feared, they were gone. An icy emptiness took over my chest. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that my own children had done it. With a heavy heart and shaking hands, I called the lawyer first, reporting the robbery and explaining the situation. He advised me to call the police immediately. Dialing the numbers with trembling fingers, I explained to the operator what had happened, feeling a mixture of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I was determined not to let Michael and Susan get away with this betrayal. When the police arrived, the scene was devastating. Officers examined the house, taking down details and asking questions. "I told you everything, from the discovery of the coins to the growing tension between my children and me." The officers listened attentively, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We'll look into this, Mrs. Thompson," one of the officers said, his voice calm and professional. He assured me that they would do everything in their power to get the coins back. The investigation process was exhaustive. The police interviewed Michael and Susan, who initially denied any involvement. However, the pressure of questions and circumstantial evidence soon revealed the truth. The coins were found hidden in Michael's home, carefully stored in a security box. The discovery brought temporary relief, but the pain of betrayal still weighed heavily on my heart. Seeing my children being confronted by the police was a bitter experience. Michael and Susan, with dejected looks, finally admitted to the theft. "I'm sorry, Mom," Michael said, his voice full of remorse, but the words sounded hollow. Susan, with tears in her eyes, repeated, "I'm sorry." But I knew it wasn't just the theft of the coins that needed to be forgiven, but all the destruction of trust and love that had occurred over the past few months. I was determined to move forward, protecting what was important to me and ensuring that my legacy helped those who truly needed it. Even if it meant watching my children face the consequences of their actions, I knew it was the only way to restore some form of justice and peace to my life. The stress built up over the past few months has finally taken its toll. One morning, I woke up with intense chest pain, a crushing sensation that made me feel like I was being compressed by an invisible weight. With difficulty, I called an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, I was quickly taken to the hospital. The ride there was a blur of sirens and worried voices as I tried to control the fear that was stirring inside me. At the hospital, I was admitted immediately. The doctors carried out a series of tests and determined that I had suffered a heart attack. The doctor, a middle-aged man with a gentle expression, explained to me the seriousness of the situation and the need for complete rest. "The stress is taking a serious toll on your health, Mrs. Thompson. You need to take care of yourself," he said, with sincere concern in his eyes. While I was in bed, still trying to process everything that had happened, I received a visit from a police officer. He entered the room with a solemn expression, holding a notebook. "Mrs. Thompson, "We found the coins at your daughter's house," he said calmly. "Your children have been detained." The confirmation brought a mix of relief and sadness. Knowing the coins were safe was a relief, but Michael and Susan's arrest was a painful blow. Shortly afterwards, Michael and Susan came to visit me in the hospital. Michael, his eyes red and swollen from crying, approached my bed. "I'm sorry, Mom. We didn't know what we were doing," he said, tears streaming down his face. There was genuine pain in his voice, but I knew his words were insufficient to erase what they had done. Susan, equally dejected, cried silently beside him. "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice broken with emotion. I knew they were just empty words. My shaking hands held the bed covers as I tried to remain calm. "You don't understand how much you hurt me," he said, his voice firm despite his tiredness. "It's not just theft. It's the breach of trust, the disrespect. You only thought about the money, not me." Their tears intensified, but I was determined. My health was too fragile to withstand any more stress. My decision was firm. I decided there would be no more arguments. The new will would remain unchanged, and the coins would be donated as planned. I hoped that, in time, Michael and Susan would understand the reason for my decision. Deep down, he wanted this event to serve as a lesson for them, a chance to reflect on their actions and perhaps, eventually, redeem themselves. But in that moment, I needed to focus on my own recovery and peace. In the hospital bed, knowing that time was precious and that emotions were running high, I decided to have one last honest and definitive conversation with Michael and Susan. I called them into my room, where the room was filled with the smell of antiseptics and the constant sound of medical monitors. They both approached, with expressions of worry and regret visible on their faces. "I want you to know my final decision," I began, my voice weak but determined. "I won't leave you anything. All the money from the coins will be donated to a hospice. I hope that someday you will understand why." My words hung in the air, creating a tense, charged silence. I saw the disbelief in Michael's eyes and the silent pain in Susan's. They tried to protest, but I silenced them with a gesture. "You need to understand that this decision is not just about the money," I continued, struggling to maintain my composure. "It's about what is fair, about doing good for those who really need it. I spent years accumulating things, trying to fill a void. These coins, this treasure, should not be a reason for more greed. I want my legacy to be one of compassion and helping others, especially the elderly who, like me, have been left behind." It was a painful but necessary decision. I needed to ensure that my legacy helped those who truly deserved it. As I saw them leave the room, I saw the mixture of frustration and hurt in their eyes. Michael turned one last time, his mouth twitching as if he wanted to say something, but stopped himself. Susan just squeezed my hand gently before leaving quietly. When the door closed, I felt a wave of relief and peace flood my heart. Finally, he had done what was right, even if it was difficult. The decision to donate the money from the coins to the hospice brought me a serenity that I hadn't felt in years. I knew that my grandfather would have approved, and that, in some way, he would be proud of me. As I lay in bed, with the afternoon sun streaming through the window and warming my face, I felt a new lightness in my chest. The burden of betrayal and conflict lifted, leaving room for hope and the satisfaction of having done something meaningful. That moment, despite the pain and sacrifice, was a milestone of redemption for me. Finally, my heart was light, knowing I did what was right. I felt a deep peace, a renewed connection to the values I had always considered important. Although my children had to travel a difficult path to fully understand my actions, I hoped that, in the end, they too would find a path of peace and understanding. With that thought, I closed my eyes, ready to face the future with serenity and strength.